Continuing with more bone markings and bone terminology, we're going to start with some different terms that can be useful when you're studying the bones and going through the process of learning the bones. So first off, the term articulation. Articulation is any point that two or more bones are coming together. Basically, this is an articulation. It's where the bones are coming together to form a joint. So articulation. The term head. The bones can have a head, as in this is the head of the femur or head of the humerus. The head is this portion right here. So usually the head is going to be something that's protruding and rounded. So the head of a bone. Facet. Now this particular bone is a vertebrae. The facet is right here and right here. Those are superior articulating facets. So a facet is usually a flat surface that can interact with another bone or another organ. So a facet. Condyle. Now in this image, we're looking at the under view or the inferior view of the skull. Right here and right here are the occipital condyles. They're raised, smooth portions. So a condyle is going to be a rounded, smoother surface. In this case, these occipital condyles will sit right on top of your first cervical vertebrae. Projections. A projection, in this case, is going to be the spinous process. It's a point coming off of a bone. So a raised marking or something protruding out is going to be a projection. Protuberance. Now a protuberance, in this case the chin, so you're looking down here, is kind of sticking out a little bit, has a mental protuberance. It's the point sticking out right down at the very bottom there. So the protuberance or the mental protuberance. Process. Now these are transverse processes or a transverse process for single. But a process is going to be a prominent feature sticking off the bone. For single whole, that was when we talked about similar before. True, process is very similar. So there's sometimes some terms that are very close and can almost be interchanged, so we'll talk about later. But these are the transverse processes of the vertebrae. Spine. Now a spine is going to be a point organ of protrusion, but usually a spine is a smaller little point. This is referred to as the ischial spine. So ischial is a region of the coxal bone, which is your hip bone, so coxal bone. The ischial spine, more of a sharp pointed protuberance. Tubercle. Now a tubercle, you can see right here we're going to have one tubercle and then a second tubercle. Those are the greater and lesser tubercles of the humerus. But a tubercle is a small protrusion sticking off the bone, usually rounded, doesn't have to be flat. In the case of these two, the tubercles of the humerus, they're a little bit bumpy, but they still are a rounded protrusion coming up, but these are a little bumpy as they come up. So a tubercle. Then we have a tuberosity. The deltoid tuberosity is this rough patch. It's about a quarter to a third of the way down the humerus there. But a tuberosity is a rough portion on the surface of the bone. Quite often, tuberosities are where muscles or tendons are attaching to the bone. And that rough surface helps to increase surface area and increase the anchoring or attachment point of the muscle. So a tuberosity. Line. Now you can think of a line as just a straight line. But in the case of a bone, a line is usually a long ridge that protrudes in a line fashion. So we have the soleal line or linus soleus. That's this ridge you can see right there. The soleal line or the linus soleus. It's a slightly elevated and elongated ridge of bone. Crest. A crest is going to be a ridge on a bone, but now the difference of this crest and line, well, a line was a straight line like it sounds. A crest is not a straight line. It's going to be a ridge or an edge. This is going to be the iliac crest. It's the ridge on the top edge of this coxal bone, the iliac crest. Then we have fossa. A fossa is going to be a shallow indent. It's not a hole, but it's a shallow depression in a bone. This is going to be the glenoid fossa. So you have that shallow indent, or say a basin at this point. It's something where usually something else can fit into. In this case, for the glenoid fossa, the head of the humerus fits right in, and that's where your shoulder joint is made. So this is the glenoid fossa. Fovea. Now the one we have here, this is the fovea capitis. It's this indent in the head of the femur. Usually a fovea is just a small pit, but this one in the femur is called the fovea capitis, and it's where a ligament helps to anchor the head of the femur into the acetabulum of the coxal bone. So we have the fovea capitis here, but fovea, small indent, small pit. Sulcus. Now the term sulcus, this right here is going to be a sulcus. A sulcus is a shallow groove, or basically a laid down indent in the bone. So what we're seeing here, that's the intertubercular sulcus. It's in between the tubercles. It's that shallow indent that sits right in between both tubercles. So a sulcus. Then we have canal. Now the term canal is going to be a passage into the bone. Right here, that is the external auditory canal. It's basically what goes into your ear. It's your ear canal. But the external auditory canal, it's an opening that goes into a bone, a canal. And sometimes that term canal can be interchanged with another term coming up. Fissure. Think about a fissure like a crack in the earth, but a fissure in a bone is going to be a long slit through the bone. This is going to be a fissure right there. You can see another fissure right above it. That's going to be the superior and inferior orbital fissures. So the fissure goes right into the bone. So kind of a slit, not a round hole, but a slit that goes to the bone. So the inferior orbital and the supraorbital fissures. Foramen. A foramen is a hole that goes through a bone. So in this case, you can see the very large foramen right there. That's the foramen magnum. That's where your brainstem and your spinal cord are going to meet. But you can also see other smaller foramen. Each one of these is a foramen here. So foramen come in different sizes, but a foramen is going to be a hole going through the bone. Sometimes foramen and canal end up being interchanged because they're both a hole or passage through a bone. But usually a foramen is just a small hole through a flatter area. Canal usually goes through a larger or thicker area of bone. But sometimes you'll see them kind of mixed back and forth. So a meatus is going to be an opening that goes into a canal. Now, sometimes you'll see the meatus and canal being swapped back and forth. Because here, I'm circling the same thing I did before. This is the external auditory meatus, but it's also known as the external auditory canal. A lot of times they can kind of be swapped back and forth because they're almost the same thing. But the meatus is the opening portion, while the canal is the whole area going in. So technically they are two separate things, but a lot of times the names get swapped back and forth because it's kind of the same location. But meatus is the opening that goes into a canal. Canal is the actual channel going through the actual bone. Then we have sinus. Now a sinus, you might think of your nasal sinuses. Well, a sinus is going to be a space within a bone. This is the sphenoidal sinus, for example. But it's going to be an air-filled space inside your bones. And you have several different sinuses up in your skull, but that's just one example of the sphenoidal sinus, an air-filled space in a bone. So all these bones, all these markings, that can also help as you start to learn the bone names, learning about the different parts and pieces, the different landmarks in the bones. Learn about these flat bones, these long bones, or just in general, all the bones and their parts. So a lot of different naming structures and parts that go into bones themselves.